welcome back to Heartbeat Narratives. My name is Molly and I'm your host. And today I'm very excited to welcome my mom, Elaine, to the podcast. Thanks for coming, Mom.
Thank you, Molly. It's an opportunity to share your life in another way.
Yeah. This podcast was really, I wanted to start it because you had this idea of writing a book way back. You know, like, who are these people? Who are the people in our neighborhoods who we never get to meet? Who are the people who make our society run? Librarians and bus drivers and school principals. And you had planted that seed in my mind years ago, and I always thought about that ever since. So your idea was the starting point for this podcast, because you are an idea person, but it kind of evolved into this Heartbeat Narratives realm. So it makes sense that you are now on.
What are the stories of the ordinary people in our neighborhoods and the public servants that, you just don't always pay a lot of attention to, but reap the benefits from when you're in some kind of need. And I became a librarian, and, just a simple kind of inclination that was created. When I look back, lived in a small town in Minnesota, and our access to a library was not there. I mean, we had a bookmobile that would come every couple of weeks, and I remember the librarian trying to, get through all the people that were on this small bookmobile and help them as best she could. And I remember her picking out books for me, suggestions and such, and I've always remembered that lady and just appreciated the fact that she zeroed in on me, probably to get me out of the bookmobile more quickly, but handing me books that got me engaged. And later on, when I was in high school, I studied a lot in the library, and because I was there so much, some of my classmates and friends would ask me questions about where things were in the library, and I knew, and it came pretty easily for me. And I like doing research the old ways. Now it's all Google and computers and, easy access. But back then you really did have to dig for your information and use the print tools at that time. So I enjoyed it, and it just always stood out to me that might be the next step for me as a career. I didn't want to go into clerical work or such. I wanted to do something a little different. Nobody else I knew wanted to be a librarian, and I just aimed towards that. When I went on to college, I got an information media degree, which had a library component, and combined that with a history degree, and zoom, I started working in libraries for quite a few years.
When I think about my childhood, I always think of summers where we would go to the library and just spend a few hours choosing random books that Jesse and I would read, and I'd come home with a stack of 15 to 20 books, and I just felt so proud that I'm going to read all these, and I'm going to know all this information about whales and plants and cooking. And we got into Harry Potter and the Babysitter's Club and all these books that have shaped my childhood and me now.
I was really sad when you kids outgrew the picture book stage at the library, because we did used to come home with big stacks of books, and a lot of mothers would talk about, oh, my child loved this book, and we read it over and over and over again. And I don't remember doing that. We just always had quite a stack of books, and we read them all. I just thought, well, children didn't get fixated just on one book. And I used to want to have you sit by me while we were reading during the daylight, not so much before nap time or before bedtime, which, you would fall asleep. And then I thought that's probably what happens to kids later. They think book times are times for falling asleep and just quieting down. But I wanted you kids to be engaged in the story. I mean, we did read before bed and before naps, but that wasn't the only time. So I thought that was important.
Do you think there are ways to get families to engage kids to read more readily?
I think going to the library and bookstores, small bookstores, used bookstores, the big bookstores, but libraries in particular. I do remember when you were just a toddler taking you to a small bookstore in Mānoa shopping center, and I had taken you to libraries too, and so we had a book bag or a shopping bag with us at the time, and I bought a couple little books at this particular little, very small bookstore. And when I got home, I saw that there were 3 other little tiny paperbacks in there that had slipped into that bag. And I thought, well, where did these come from? And you, just being a toddler, I think you assumed we were at the library, if you were even thinking. So you just put it in the bag, And so I had to take you back to the store later. And I said, she put these in the bag. We didn't pay for them. We didn't use a library card. We used a credit card, to buy the books. But your first little opportunity to be a thief, I think.
Was because I really thought I was at a library.
Yeah, and they were unusual little tiny paperback books from Australia. I've never seen them before. So we did go back and pay for them. Your first experience of making a wrong a right.
So you ended up moving from a small town in Minnesota to Honolulu, Hawaii for graduate school to go into library information science. That was a big leap.
It was a big leap. After my undergraduate degree, I got a job at a vocational technical school as a clerical support library aide. Mm-hmm. And after about a year and a half or so, I could see that it was kind of a dead-end job. It was too much typing, too little reference work, and I wanted to do reference work. I wanted to work in a community college because I'd had good experiences in a community college as a student and having a mentorship with a librarian, and I wanted to have her kind of job. And so after I was working for 15, 18 months at this VOTEC school, I started looking at places to go to grad school that were accredited. And then the opportunity came for me to go to Hawaii for a vacation. And while I was here, kind of unusual for my personality was to get on a bus, a city bus, and get to the campus all by myself. My friends who I came to Hawaii with were doing other things, and I just took this bus. And I found the library school. The secretary there was so encouraging of me to talk to the dean, who just happened to be on campus, and talk to him, and he encouraged me to apply because I did have some library experiences already, and I did apply. And it was shortly after, a couple years after my mom had died, and I'd been living with my dad, and I thought, this would be just unheard of for me to leave my dad, but I did apply, and then I did get accepted, and within a few months I was at the University of Hawaiʻi. Everything just fell into place, my financial aid, my housing. I left Minnesota in January on a 20 below zero weather day and got to Honolulu on a day when it was 80, so it was 100 degrees different. And I started the library school here at the University of Hawaiʻi, and everybody was so welcoming throughout the whole time I was a student. People were just so gracious to me, and I made friends that I have to this day. And even though I was afraid maybe I wouldn't get a job upon graduation, I did. I got every job pretty much that I ever applied for, mm-hmm. which I always felt that I got jobs kind of through the back door. I never felt I was the smartest or the most professional of librarians, but I always felt I was approachable in my work, and I think that always carried through in my job interviews. So I always had a job, and I started in academic libraries from the VOTEC to the eventual rounding up my career in a public library system.
What year was that you came?
1979, January of 1979.
And there probably weren't that many redheads on campus.
No, the campus, it still seemed kind of small-towny back then, so I think people that looked new and different stood out. even in my library school was quite a diverse population of students from Asia, from the South Pacific Islands, the Philippines, Indonesia, China, and the local Hawaii students, and then people like me that came from the mainland. And because we're all kind of transient here, and the way the program was set up, it was just so nurturing at that time. And it was mostly centered around book or print media. It was just the beginning of, the online and computers and databases and things like that. And of course, I didn't take those kind of classes. I took the basic reference, the scientific references, the liberal arts reference classes. So that was my intention, to be like a reference librarian. When I did graduate, I was planning to go back home to Minnesota, but the dean and the office staff at the library school said, take a few practice interviews, and I did, and I got one of the jobs. I mean, it was a surprise for me, and I remember 2 other graduates of my class rode the bus with me because they had job interviews for the same job, and I was the last of the 3 of us to interview, and I just felt I wouldn't get the job, but I did. Mm-hmm. So, and it was a small college, and again, a very multicultural student population. It was like 1/3 mainland kids, 1/3 local kids from Hawaii, and 1/3 Asia Pacific kids. So right away I was working with people from countries I'd never known anything about, and I just really enjoyed working with the students.
I feel like you blossomed.
Yeah, I really felt, when I left Minnesota, I just felt that there just wasn't a lot there for me. And I think my mother had died, a few years earlier, I just kind of felt I had to make a new beginning. I wasn't aware of that at the time, but I just felt I had to move on. Mm. It was really hard to leave my dad, but I think it worked out for the best. But yeah, I did blossom in Hawaii, and even to this day when I come back to visit, eventually I did go back to Minnesota, but it's still home in a different way than the home I have now. Mm-hmm. So I still feel part of it when I've come back 30 years later, because we moved. Once I married a local boy from Hawaii, and eventually we get squeezed out of Hawaii. Back then even it was happening, and financially, and couldn't get a house or an apartment. There was a lot of Canadian and Japanese investment in housing at that time, and local people were just squeezed out. And we were lucky. We got jobs back in Minnesota back in 1986 for a year, and then again we went back to Hawaii, and then came back to Minnesota in 1992. And right away we were able to buy a house, get a car, look for schools for the children eventually, close by, walking distance. I mean, everything was just, again, boom, 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 fell into place.
Mm-hmm. I think it's important to note that Dad ended up getting a library degree as well, following your lead.
Yeah, he got a degree in AV technology that had a library component, and he realized he liked the library component even more. So about 10 years after I got my degree, he got his library degree. And ironically, he ended up working my dream job, which was working in a community college. Mm-hmm. And then I went on to public library work, which was very enjoyable to me. But he got the academic job, and I got the public library job.
It's always funny to tell people that I was raised by 2 librarians, because I think it's a very unusual pairing in a way, and to have both your parents be like the Googles before Google.
Yeah.
And always have information at their fingertips made it really easy for me throughout school. I could say, hey, I'm writing a paper about jellyfish, and then Dad would have like 15 references for me to dig through.
Yeah, he was a lot better at the technological end of doing library research. I mean, I could do it too, but because he was working in a college at that time, any of yours and your brother's research projects were easily researched. Our input into some of your research projects were quite evident, but you did all the work, but we dug a little deeper and a little more wider than maybe you would have done on your own.
We had the best bibliography.
Yes, you knew what a bibliography was probably early on, and at least you did. Your brother maybe not quite so much, but he was more independent, I think, or didn't want us to be too involved in his schoolwork. But I always felt it was important, as even in a public library, people would ask all kinds of questions. Again, this was before Google, and all those other access points, but there used to be lines of people at the reference desks, and you never knew what the next question was going to be, whether it's looking up somebody's, phone number or address. It used to be that you could find out who your neighbor was with the barking dog, find out what their phone number was at the library, and call them. You hand out that information, but now you can do that all on your own. So the questions have changed over the years.
I remember being a kid and seeing the line to the reference desk and you working at it at the public library. And I didn't understand at the time the variety of questions that you received, because being a librarian, I feel like you're very much the under-the-radar frontline workers, because you get tax questions. Sometimes you're kind of called upon to be almost like social workers, because there's all these different needs of people who come in, people who are trying to get jobs but are undocumented or they don't speak English, people who are houseless, kids who come in the library after school and you're basically babysitting.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's all these different needs, but you're not necessarily trained to handle them, but you have to handle them.
And you never quite know what you're going to get. There was a woman that came in and she was wearing long skirts and flowing kind of blouse and everything, and she'd turn around in a circle and she would put hexes on people. So I found out later that, she was a regular. I was subbing at that library, and the other staff said, oh yeah, that's so-and-so. She thinks she's a witch, and so she doesn't like somebody. She puts a hex on them, and just little, it was kind of peculiar. But then we had sad things about people coming in with, had been diagnosed with something at their doctor's offices and didn't know what the condition was, and coming to the library to find out what that condition was. And one of the sad things was this man came in and had a Huntington disease diagnosis, and I thought, why didn't the doctors give them this information? I took him to a medical reference book, and he had to read it with me,
Mm-hmm.
and I just thought how sad that was at that time, that he had to go to the library to find out what was going on with his body. We get unattended kids. Parents would drop them off at the library rather than out on the streets playing, and so they played in the library. So a lot of little rascals. And we'd get homeless people and people that were having drug issues,
Mm-hmm.
would fall asleep in certain places in the library. And you can go from being scared about how to deal with these people, or learn techniques on how to diffuse situations, which thankfully I didn't have to do very often. But you were always aware that things could go bad in this public space because everybody's welcomed.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes mostly it's just to listen or to keep the situation calm, guide the person to another area privately,
Mm-hmm.
Rather than public, please leave the library. Although there were times when we had to tell people you need to leave because you're disruptive. And you all learn techniques after a while. Thankfully, there's people that are professional and clear in diffusing situations.
Yeah. So I recently called 5 different libraries in Hawaii because I was looking for a quiet space to record podcast interviews. And I noticed that every single person that answered the phone was so gentle and kind and personable. And I know that that's not across the board, but who are the people that are drawn to the profession of being a librarian? Because I have loved all of your coworkers, and I feel like there's like personalities that are drawn to this kind of career.
Well, I think it's probably changed a little bit, but I think maybe a lot of librarians have a tendency towards introversions and a certain empathy that maybe they've acquired from reading. You never know. But I think a lot of librarians, you think of small town librarians where they might have been the smartest person in their classes in these small places, or the smartest odd duck people. I mean, I do think some librarians, quite a few, are kind of odd ducks, have a wide range of interests. They could be teachers, they could be travelers, they just look at the world a little differently. And I think I probably fit the mold more of a traditional librarian. I mean, not that I wore my hair in a bun or anything like that, but I liked to read. I liked to help people find information. I mean, just a helping kind of person. I liked trivia type pursuit questions. You're handing the light. Somebody has a question and you provide the answer. I always got a lot of instant gratification out of that.
Yeah, because you're helping one person at a time, and it might be like, hey, I want to travel to Singapore. What do I need to know before I go? Or can you help me with my taxes?
Oh, yeah, that was always a very common question, because the library for many years in our state provided tax forms. And we had to get familiar with some of the forms, but we could not advise people on how to fill out their taxes, but we had to be aware of what forms they might need. And that was just a steady question. And then another question we would get we had all the car manuals in our libraries, the Haynes, car repair manuals, and I got pretty good about helping people find, how to fix their cars. And people with those questions were always very chatty about their cars and wanting to tell you about, this spark plug and this wire going here and there and everywhere. And I thought I could care less, but because I found them in the information, I had to at least hear them talk about what they were going to do with it. So I learned more about cars than I cared to.
What are some of the most interesting interactions that you had? I know that...
Well, I always liked working with foreign students. For some reason, they were very wanting to learn and appreciated somebody helping them, making things more simple for them, and I really liked that. We worked when science fair project time came up in the schools. That was kind of frustrating, but also interesting to see what kids were picking for their science fair and projects, and trying to find the support to go along with their bibliographies. So that was interesting.
You mentioned once that there was a horoscope lady.
Oh, yeah. I think almost every public library anywhere in the country, you get the regular people that call, and some of them are a little off the wall. And at the system that I was working at, every branch of that county library encountered the same lady, because she wouldn't call every week to the same library. She'd call different libraries, but she would call and want different horoscopes read to her over the phone. And so, somebody always answered it and said, oh, yes, we just called it the horoscope lady, or the same lady or somebody just like her would call and want to know histories behind a particular flowers. What does having a white rose mean? And then there was this lady that would call, and she'd want to know, like, real bizarre questions, like, I have a family member buried up in St. Cloud, Minnesota, and I want to know how close the closest Walmart is. And so we'd have to do, like Google directions and everything, like where's the Walmart, where's the cemetery.
Oh my goodness.
We could never figure out why it was always a question about a cemetery and something else being how far away. And I don't know if she took a taxi from the Walmart to the but it was just bizarre. And occasionally a question about, I listened to something on public radio, and it was some composer, and I can't remember the composer, and the song was really pretty, but I can't remember the name of the song. Can you find it for me? And, you end up researching that particular radio program like 3 weeks ago and the time period that a song may have been presented. And you can actually find things like that. And that took some digging, but there are ways to do that.
You're a professional at going down rabbit holes.
Yeah. Then you learn to put the person not on hold, but tell them that you'll call them back with the answer. And they might not like the answer, but they get what they get.
Focusing on you, are there books that really, I guess, sparked your interest in becoming a librarian, or just books that you enjoy now? Because I know you're an avid reader.
Well, I read a lot, and back when I was first starting out, I read a lot of magazine articles too. But I think growing up, I was influenced. We had these maiden aunts that would send us every year for Christmas Laura Ingalls Wilder books, the Betsy Tacy stories, and Minnesota got long winters. And so reading was always a part of just snuggling up with a blanket near a fireplace and reading quite a bit. So, I have those memories, as do many of my friends, having the bookmobile and getting books for Christmas and getting excited about what we were going to get this year or that year. I read, when I was in middle school and high school, I read a lot of really big, thick books, a lot of historical fiction. I got interested in that. And I did become a history major in college, so I enjoyed having all that history. I just felt the more I read, the more I learned, the more I could share.
Yeah.
So.
And what are you reading now?
Oh my gosh. Well, I guess with the current political situations and stressfulness of life, I'm reading a lot of soft British crime novels right now. And I do read some religious information, not so much self-help, but spiritual help type books.
Outlander?
I read the Outlander books multiple times. Again, sometimes you find that the things you wouldn't read 20 years ago, you read later on, and they just kind of click in you because the characters become friends after a while. And when I was working at the most recent public library, part of my job was to help book selection. And I missed that stage because I could get a heads up on what new books were coming out and the book reviews. So I missed that stage because I could get some of these new books before they or put my name in the waiting list before everybody else found out about them. And so I do miss that. And I've read books about artificial robotic friendships and the new technology, what's the next step going to be. And I do kind of like to read apocalyptic kind of stories, which can be kind of scary, but they stretch your imagination.
I know when you read those, because I live so far away in Hawaii, sometimes what you're reading leads you to worry about me living so far away even more.
Yes, Molly, do not walk down dark streets by yourself. Don't talk to strangers.
And I'm like, what are you watching TV these days that you're so worried about me? Or reading?
Well, it makes you wonder who the authors are of some of these really awful books and what their minds are involved with. So.
There's just so much information out there that's readily available. But I appreciate you having introduced me to the Libby app.
Yeah,
and things like that.
Yeah, it's another way. And a lot of people don't want to use electronic readers because they like the smell of real books. That's a real thing, or to actually touch the pages of a book. And I would have said 5-10 years ago, I was one that preferred to just read a book. I had to show people how to use the e-readers and use the Libby format. And now I read mostly on the e-reader. It has its drawbacks. You can't flip back to the beginning of the book quite as easily unless you make a special note somewhere. It's harder to find things if you have a question and want to go back and forth between different parts of the book. But it certainly has revolutionized, people say, libraries are going to disappear, but they're not. People are still reading, they're just reading differently. And they might be doing audio books, they might be doing e-readers, or I have found that when if I've read a book in the ebook format, that a lot of times I'll go and check out the book format later because I always feel like I missed something. I missed something in just, reading it that way or even listening to it on an audio book. I go back and get the real book to fill in any gaps I think I might have had. So
I think you're right about libraries not going away. They very much are pillars in the community in the same way that schools and fire departments are, City Hall plus the library. And I always loved that you and Dad worked at places where a lot of people would come and see you, and you would interact with all different kinds of folks.
Because libraries, even academic libraries, are almost gathering places and community centers and starting points. I mean, there's public libraries that have coffee in the entrance, where homeless people can come and have a little something to eat because they're going to be in the library anyways. They might as well have had some kind of meal or nourishment prior to that. And then social services can come in and see those people and steer them to places that can help them better. So there's that going on. Little kids coming to the libraries for story hours, school kids coming in to do homework, parents coming into parenting books. I mean, it really is a central location. And even school lunches that, like when they stop during the school breaks and such, libraries are the places where people come and pick up food even. So they really are community centers. And I think I would advise people to always get to know their neighborhood library, to seek it out, because it really is important that kids have that other safe place. Yeah. Not just your schools or your homes, but it's just another safe place for them to be.
Having worked in libraries for decades, I'm sure there are things that you would appreciate from patrons who come in. What would be helpful for you and other librarians for just everyday people coming in to know?
Well, we're not your living room exactly, and the putting your feet up on the tables and eating food and things like that, unless it's allowed in your particular library. Clean up your messes. There's other people gonna be there too at some point in that day. Being thoughtful of other patrons, especially when there weren't as many computers in the library. People would get impatient if they had to wait for a computer or the print machine. Just there are other people here. Just common decency, common politeness.
Pay your fines.
Well, a lot of fines are eliminated. There's people that wouldn't come back to a library because they have a book that they never returned and they think they're on some huge blacklist and the bells and whistles are going to go off when they come into the library and they'll be put in jail or something. But most places, if you've had books that have been out for like a couple of years, we just want the book back, and if there's a fine attached to it, it usually can be managed somehow. And a lot of libraries aren't even charging fines. And there's so much right now that's available online through your library, all kinds of resources. Get to know your librarian and let them know what your needs are, and they can steer you towards tax help, legal help, medical help, academic help, searching for books for, like, say, a parent has a child with a disability, finding stories that are appropriate to that child. I mean, just get to know your librarian. Because so much is online, a lot of librarians have kind of lost touch with the direct patron care, so they really welcome the opportunity to talk to you and find out what your needs are, and they'll give you the print and the non-print access points to your needs.
Are there any career highlights that you wanted to share?
One of the highlights of my career choice was when I was asked by a teacher in library studies at the University of Hawaiʻi. She asked me to come and speak to her reference class, or beginning librarianship class, I guess it was. and just tell them my story. And I remember how when I was a student, how intimidated I was and being told that it might be hard to get a job in the field, and how scared I was that I was putting all this money into my career choice and wasn't sure if I'd get a job. So when I went to talk to these students, they had to critique my talk with them. And I told them, I was scared as a library student. I was scared when I started my first professional job. And I told them about the things that I learned in the different libraries I had worked at. And I kept it really real. And I think the teacher had wanted me to kind of expound on, the real futuristic aspects of the library and such. But I just told them, like, from day one, this is what we did. And I gave them advice about getting as much experience as you can, not locking yourself into one type of library. A couple weeks later, the teacher sent me all the critiques of the talk, and almost all of them just really appreciated that I kept it real for them. I didn't scare them, and wasn't too lofty and, highbrow about what the job entailed. I just told them, interesting stories of people I'd met and questions I'd had, and that was really validating to me that they were scared too, just like I was back then. And now I was giving them advice that they could actually work with, and they weren't intimidated into what kind of career am I really going into.
Was there a book that changed your life?
When I was in high school, I remember reading the book The Chosen by Chaim Potok, I think that was his last name, and it was a story of two Jewish boys, two very different Jewish boys in New York after World War II that were very academically oriented. One was a Hasidic Jew and the other was, I think a regular Jewish boy, but they became an unlikely friendship. But they had such an intense academic, just really were very, very studious. And for some reason that really influenced me to be as good of a student as I could be, but not to that degree of intensity. But to have two boys from the Jewish world, but two different types of Jews, and becoming friends, lifelong friends. And I don't know, it just really had an intensity, or brought an intensity to my own academic endeavors. And I think I can look back on that, and just say that made me a better student, I think.
Yeah.
And also introduced me to that kind of world, which, I was not familiar with at all.
Yeah. What does good storytelling look like to you, having read so much?
It is interesting that when you first open up the first couple pages of a book, some people drag out the introductions to the book and you just lose interest right away. And then some people can just word things that they're the same words, but they just grab your attention right away, and that holds your attention through the whole book. So I don't know what that skill is. I guess you'd have to examine writing skills, awareness skills. Why does one poem speak to two different people in two different ways? It's in books that, again, maybe you wouldn't like at one period of your life, but it's very meaningful at another. I never read crime stories. I mean, I'm not reading true crime. I'm reading
fluffy crime.
Fluffy crimes, and not the dog story or the cookbook crimes. I read the British crime series, and I don't even know Britain, but for some reason I'm enjoying some of these British stories and TV shows.
I know. I know you've been reading like Scandinavian things.
Oh yeah, they're kind of dark.
I remember you brought home Harry Potter when I was in like 4th grade, and I tried reading it, but I didn't get into it until I was 11. And this is significant because Harry Potter was 11 when he was accepted into Hogwarts. So as I was reading that first book, and something clicked differently, like reading it a little bit later, but at the same age of the characters, I thought that I was going to receive my invitation to become a witch student at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. And I just felt like I grew up with those characters, and it like defined my youth.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that kind of storytelling where you're totally immersed changes who you are.
And I think that Harry Potter phenomena was a real boon to libraries and bookstores, because people were slowing down in their reading back in those days. And then this character appeared on the scene, and libraries benefited greatly from the interest in the Harry Potter stories. And I think a lot of kids started to enjoy libraries again. But yeah, that was a real phenomena.
I remember you and Dad would take us to the book releases at like midnight.
Uh-huh.
I remember one summer going to Barnes & Noble. All these kids were dressed up as wizards and witches, and we had wands, and staying up till 4 a.m. afterwards reading like the first third of this huge book.
That was, yeah, I mean, again, as an adult, that was really fun to see. But, you know, I couldn't get into the Harry Potter books. It just didn't appeal to me. And I read them maybe when I was in my 40s or 50s. And they were cute, but they still didn't grab me. But I certainly appreciated the fact that you and your friends were really into it, you know. And so really, that's a unique part of your particular childhood, because I can't think of a book right now that the young people are grabbing onto. But there's the anime genres and the comic type stories and everything. That's a whole genre I've never gotten into, but it is super popular with children and adults. Yeah. Thank God for writers.
I know. For creative people who put pen to paper.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else that you want to add that came up during our conversation?
I just was always appreciative that I've had so much variety in my career, you know, academic and public library work, big public library and small public library. And I'm just very happy I was able to do that, and very happy in my career. And most of my library friends, librarian friends, were happy in their careers too. You know, whichever, they could have been academic librarians, they could have been small school libraries, medical librarians, business librarians. There's quite a lot of variety to library work and specialties you can go into. Government librarians, music librarians. Yeah, it was a great career. Now that I'm retired, you know, I do kind of miss it, but it did change dramatically over the years. I knew when it was time to leave, because the technology was just going faster than I was interested in at that point.
But I think it's just cool to see how a career can evolve over time, and you've worked with so many different people, you've had so many different encounters, and you've learned, you know, a little about a lot.
Not very deep. So for me, but some librarians, specialty librarians, really know their subject matters. And a friend of mine was a medical librarian, and they were instructing the medical students on how to use databases and laptops and e-readers and all that type of thing. And I didn't go that direction at all. And theirs really was, you know, life-affirming or life-ending for some of their people. But I think I was where I was meant to be.
It's very clear that your passion was your vocation, too.
I was lucky. And it all starts with a good person somewhere that steers you towards a good book.
Thank you for encouraging me to read as a kid. I think it paid off. And also making me take piano lessons.
Oh, yes.
But really the reading, it has shaped everything for me now as an adult.
And it's funny because so many people, you know, you see them maybe on a laptop or a e-reader of some kind, and you're just assuming they're playing games or on social media, but there's a lot more people out there that are actually reading books. Even when I went to eye doctor one time, I found out he was in a book club already with other men his age, and his girlfriend was also in her women's book club. And so I think there's a lot more reading going on out there than maybe people going to the library. They're finding the materials on their own or word of mouth. There are lots of readers still out there.
Yeah. I think people are also taking a step back from technology and they want things to be simpler and simplified and not be on their screens.
Yeah. And I find that myself too. When you're traveling, you bring your electronics with you, but there's a book in there.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mom, for coming on Heartbeat Narratives.
Thank you. It was fun.
Yeah, this is fun. I guess we're going to go read before we go to bed.
I always do. It doesn't always put me to sleep either.
I know, we're doing this interview pretty late, so I think we're getting a little tired. But thank you, everybody, for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Goodbye.